Hey, good evening, everybody, and happy Sunday night to all of you out there. My name is Dean Packard, and I'm the proud principal of Charlton Middle School in Charlton, Massachusetts. And tonight we've got another great Unlock the Middle episode where we are digging into, are you a future-ready leader? We have got a great panel tonight, and we are not going to disappoint, as we've got one of the best in the country of a keynote speaker, author, just somebody who is a shining star when it comes to innovation and future readiness. Hey, guys, first and foremost, welcome to the roundtable. I'm going to first kick it over to Chris Starcheski, our co-host. Great to see all of you tonight. Chris, starting with you. How are you, brother?
Hey, thanks, Dean. Thanks for kicking off the show, and welcome everyone to our Future Ready Leaders discussion tonight. I am the principal at Dudley Middle School and partner in crime of Dean Packard over here with Unlock the Middle. We're really excited tonight just to introduce you and familiarize you with several of our regular faces and one brand new face, and then our keynote discussion tonight. Josh Tovar from Texas. We've got Jeff Parks from Parker Middle School in Massachusetts. We've got Dr. Frederick White from Bellevue Middle in Tennessee, and Alejandro Olvera from El Paso, Texas. How are you all doing, gentlemen, in that order? Great. Josh, you're looking good, man.
Who's going first? Who'd you throw the baton to? Josh.
I got Josh to say
Happy
hello.
Sunday. Welcome to everybody. Please remember to share our post right now. Interact with us. Please, we want to hear from you because you know what? We're only stronger together. Remember, iron sharpens iron, and let's learn from each other. From California to Massachusetts to Florida, we're all in it together.
Awesome, Jeff.
Yeah, glad to be back, guys. It's great to see everybody. Fired up. Happy Sunday, and let's get ready for another great week coming up. Thank you.
Sweet. Frederick, welcome, my friend.
Glad to be here. Welcome, everybody that's watching and viewing. Hope everyone's staying safe. Thank everybody for listening. Hopefully you can get something out of this conversation between great leaders. I always do.
And Alejandro, welcome. First timer. Give us a little intro. Let the world know who you are.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor to be here. I hope I can, assist with the discussion. I look forward to it. My first time. My name is Alejandro Olvera. I'm a principal in Socorro ISD out here in El Paso, Texas, of K8 campus.
Great.
Brilliant. So we've got some great representatives with us, Dean, and Tom Murray. He is working with the Future Ready Schools, FRS, where he serves as the Director of Innovation. He's an ASCD best-selling author. Tom's a highly regarded keynote speaker, and during our pregame, found out that he's got his day job at Future Ready Schools, and he does a lot of speaking during his free time, and he travels around the country. He's got a wealth of experience in K through 12 digital leadership, and he's been recognized on a national scale. His latest book, or his previous book, Learning Transformed 8 Keys, has been a top 10 bestseller, and his most recent book, Personal and Authentic, is sure to be a helpful read to all those leaders who are out there. Tom, how are you tonight, and welcome?
What's up, everybody? I'm so glad to be here. And I was actually thinking, before that intro, maybe I was the only educator that was free tonight. And it was this was the last show. And I was the last possible person on the list. So I appreciate the kind words, my friends. Honored to be with you.
Well, Tom, we've been going back and forth, and we obviously know that if you've seen some of our shows, we talk about a lot of topics that are germane to what we do every day. But one being future ready. I think if you stop and think about that for a second, we all like to think that we're future ready leaders because we're making those small steps forward. But as we dig in and look at what future ready is all about, kind of give us a little background from your perspective and your lens as you prepare, leaders in schools to open up in a new mindset. What does that look like?
Yeah, so what a great conversation. And first of all, I want to give a shout out to the incredible educators that I see from coast to coast, whether they're teaching in classrooms every day, superintendents, principals, and anybody in between. I mean, let's face it, the chaos on the outside of our walls, the fear, the anxiety, and yet here people are tuning in on a Sunday night when they're exhausted. The first couple of weeks have already been chaotic, and you guys are jumping in, and other folks around the country are jumping in. So I'll never start anything I do, even just a discussion like this, without first saying thanks. And so any educators watching this, whether you're an administrator or a first-year teacher, I just want to say thank you on behalf of Future Ready Schools and myself personally for the work that you do each and every day, because the work is ridiculously hard, but our kids are worth it. And so with that, when we talk about Future Ready, when I talk about Future Ready leadership, for me, it's about mindset and it's about action. Having served as a principal at an elementary level, at a middle level, having served as an administrator at the high school level, and also at the district level, I can tell you, I know the feeling of having like 1,000,001 things on the plate, maximized by you guys now having like COVID and masks and no masks and all the politics that go around with everything that we're doing. It's about mindset and it's about actions. There's so many times where we know the right thing to do, but then we get the yeah buts. But like, what might our board think? I've got the board president in my middle school. I'm their son or daughter in my middle school. I don't want to push the envelope too far. Or tackling grading, tackling attendance policies, tackling things that have just been structures of the past. It's so easy quite often to say like, yeah, we're going to kick that down the road a little bit. And so when we talk about future ready leadership, it's words like we, our, and they, as opposed to like me and my. It's mindsets that aren't ego and pride as school leaders. It's much more driven on what do our kids really need. I'm also a father, and one of my most important role, I'm a father to an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. And so looking at it through the eyes of what is it that they need for their future? How can we best unlock that? I'm very blessed to live in an incredible district in Pennsylvania with future-ready leaders. But we're really talking about mindset. We're talking about actions. We're talking about breaking down barriers to traditional structures, traditional barriers that have really held people down in the past. And how do we get those things out of the way and recognize this work is not about us. It truly is about them. And so at Future Ready Schools, I encourage you to check it out at futureready.org, bipartisan, nonprofit. We're not there to be red. We're not there to be blue. We're there to support kids and really work through a lot of things around equity, taking a look at things around the Future Ready framework, and just ways to support school and district leaders from coast to coast. Because I will tell you, no matter where I go, there's amazing people leading schools that are working incredibly hard, truly nonstop for the benefit of our kids. And so what an honor it is to be with you guys today.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, that's a great lead into what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I think before we dig a little bit deeper, let's kick it down to Jeff. I mean, we're going to go across the board here and say, what do you think Future Ready means through your lens?
So a lot of what Tom was talking about, but the things that resonate with me is courage, right? Courage to break the mold, to change the same old, and kind of the way that we've always done business. So I think we've all heard the phrase, the most dangerous thing you can say is we've always done it this way, right? So for me, it's really getting the staff and the students in a position where we're comfortable to be vulnerable and feel comfortable taking some risk. And I try to talk to the staff and I encourage them and I say, try something. Let's try something different. Let's do it differently than we have in the past. And if it doesn't work, we'll evaluate, reflect, and make a different decision next time. Not everything has to be try it once and this is the way we're going to do it moving forward. So it's really about just trying to empower people and encourage them to take those big leaps that are going to be so important to help us change what we're doing moving forward.
Good stuff. Dr. White.
Well, I think when we talk about the future leader, if we're talking about our kids, if we're talking about the staff, starting with that end in mind, I tell teachers all the time when we're talking about our kids, let's picture the kid that we want at the end of their time with us. Now, what do we need to put in place to reach that goal? I tell principals when I coach principals the same thing. If you want to build a staff, a school, an environment, picture that. Picture that perfect environment that you want, those perfect teachers. Now, what are you going to do? What are you going to put in place to make that happen? What actions do you as the building leader need to take to make that happen? Now, also think about what barriers you're going to run into. How are you going to get rid of those barriers that you're going to run into? Knowing that sometimes as a leader, you have bosses to answer to. How are you going to break out of that cage? How are you going to break out of that box and keep your job? But how are you going to do these things and make that dream school, that dream environment, that dream teacher, that dream student? How are you going to make that happen? So that's our goal, creating that environment, but putting everything in place to get there.
Alejandro?
Well, I think that as educators, we need to set the pace. At the end of the day, when we're looking at that, I agree with Jeff when he talked about taking a risk. And sometimes we are going to fall flat on our face. We are going to struggle, but we have to adapt and make changes. And that's the way the world works. That's the way commerce works. That's the way businesses work. They make adjustments and make tweaks to make things better. But I think something important that we do, even what we're doing right here, is networking with one another, so that if something's working out there in Pennsylvania, something's working out there in California, that we are able to network and help each other out and brainstorm with each other, because every campus is different. Every district, Dr. Frederick talked about it. We want to keep our jobs. We want to do what's within limits, but we have to think outside the box and set that in, systems, infrastructure. And I think that something that's very important is that this is not something that's short term. It's a long-term goal. And, sometimes we get narrowed with one thing, or, the hype, or these are the words of the now, and everybody's in that craze, but it's a long-term goal. And we have to start setting that in pace, so that whether I'm here on my campus or somebody comes after me, that continues for our kids, that we have that for the high schools, that we have that so that they're successful at the college level, as we look at this as educators and administrators.
Well, one thing that Chris and I always say is that COVID has given us an opportunity to reimagine and rethink schools. And anybody who isn't thinking that way, that's in leadership or in a classroom, you got to really kind of check where you're at, because right now we have so many new tools and so many new ways to build that positive culture within our classrooms and our buildings. And one of the best in the country, I'm going to go to next, Principal Tovar. Talk to us about your way that you're using culture as that tool.
You know what? It's all centered to me on the why. The growth mindset and everything, all these things, as tenured people that sit in our chair, we never were taught this by Sir Giovanni. We were never taught this at Sul Ross State University, at UTEP, at whatever university you went to. Right now, we are on the airplane building it as it's flying. So the most important thing is to hunker down on what our why is, making sure that we remember that kid. Not just the AP kid or the kid with a 77 or the kid with a 42. It's all the kids. And sustaining that purpose that we have and doing everything. Right now, the growth mindset, risk takers, that's all what we're about right now, just like Dean and Chris said. It's about having this opportunity with Rona to make sure that we break down the stereotypical square box that we have in education. And that's a great plus. And as leaders, we need to build upon that, because our kids deserve it. Prior to the Rona, there was a YouTube video that was called Shift Happens. And I show it a lot to people. And it has stats that will blow your mind. Well, those stats are now even irrelevant because of the change due to Rona. So I suggest everyone to go onto YouTube and see the Shift Happens video, because right now what we need is to maintain our why. Our why, and that's what the thing is. We get our keys, we put it into the ignition, and we go to work. It's all the kids, not the ones for MIT, not the ones for community college, but all the trade, all our kids. And it starts from pre-K all the way to their senior year, and always working together and not being ashamed or being afraid to surround yourself with people that are way smarter than us. That's what we need to do. People that are way smarter than us, because right now we need every single last dendrite, every single last brain cell to help us push our kids ahead, because they're the future of our country.
I'm glad you said that, because you know what? Teaching kids about the why is one of the most important things you can do as an instructional leader, because once they understand the reason why they're in school and the fuel that drives them, their effort and their attitude each and every day will help define who they're going to become as a as a learner. Because you think about it, this is a journey. We all have to be there for every student, every day, every second. And if we do that, your school is going to be that future ready school. There's no doubt. Chris, kick it over to you.
Yeah, the only thought I could possibly add, I agree with everything across the board. A couple of years ago, I read a book, One Mission, How Leaders Build a Team of Teams. It's a military book, and it talked about the transformation of military strategy and communication structures, really in the Middle East and Asian, Euro-Asian areas of the world. And it talked about how the mission needed to shift and shape a bit. And the antiquated strategists that were leading the charge needed to make some adjustments. All right. Old school strategy, right? Guess what? We got new methodologies, and in some ways, and to use military terms, there was a new enemy, and the enemy wasn't operating as they had previously operated. So they needed to really shift and change to the current and predict where things could go down the line. And there were some elements in the book that really talked about communication structures and how you could really, instead of creating a hierarchy, pyramid approach to leadership, it really talked about the idea of a spiral staircase where there's a central core communication going right down the middle with rungs coming out like that spiral staircase. That message down the middle is that central core value, that core purpose, and everybody is contributing. But as a leader, we have to ensure that everybody is continually connected to that spiral spike in the middle to ensure that we're all working together. So, in a middle school, that's something that I am trying to wrap my head around in terms of making sure that everyone's clear where we're going, what our kids need, but also how we're contributing to that mission, whatever level we're contributing. It doesn't mean that we have to be completely innovative and completely authentic in action, but we have to be connected to that central core, and that's preparing kids for their future, not our past.
Well, we toss that term future ready around a lot. And again, when you start defining that meaning, it will look differently to everybody from their own seat. So, Tom, I'm going to kick it back to you. And let's talk a little bit about equity within the terms of being future ready. We all know that all kids need equal access to learning experiences. That's a given. So where would you go with this in regards to pointing us in a direction to have a better understanding?
So when we think about equity, we talk about it really in two ways. We talk about it in access and we talk about it in opportunity. There's so many facets that we can go, and even in just 45 minutes, we cannot do equity justice. That's for sure. I was standing in Wyoming the day before the pandemic hit, that Friday the 13th, and I remember I was working with a staff and having lunch with the superintendent. And there we were, and about 20 minutes prior to wrapping up, he said, Tom, I'm going to have you wrap up early because these teachers are not coming back next week. And I'll tell you, normally as a presenter, if a superintendent pulls you off the stage, that's not really a good thing, all right? But this was different. Here's why I share that. At Future Ready, we've been talking about, let's start with the access side, for 6 years since inception, about kids that didn't have connectivity at home. And in our latest report we did last summer on this topic, it was about 16.9 million children, disproportionately it's our Black and brown children, that didn't have connectivity. All of a sudden on that next week, all of a sudden it became front and center. What do I do for my kids that aren't connected? So here's my pushback and my thoughts. Why didn't we care as much about that on the Tuesday before that week? Because we had 16.9 million children without connectivity, and about 70% of our teachers pre-COVID were asking our kids to do something digital outside of school. So I want to be really clear. COVID did not create equity issues. COVID amplified equity issues that have long existed, and now they're just front and center. And so one of the things when we look at COVID, like the access one is the easy one to talk about right now because everybody's talking about it. If that gap's not there and kids had to be home or kids had to be remote, I know a lot of that shifted in the vast majority of our places for this year with being back. But here's the thing. You want to know how you really feel on equity? Did you pull all the devices and the hotspots back for the kids without access this year? Because they still don't have connectivity at home, but we're asking them to do something digital. So we look like we're, equity warriors. We'll get it in the hands. And now that they're back 5 days, now we pull it back. What does that say? What do we really believe? Because here's the thing. When we talk about equity, it's not about checking a box. It's not doing about a quick assessment, a quick survey and be like, check. It's not about bringing in the consultant being like, yep, we had a couple meetings. We had a parent meeting. Check. You see, I was running an event one time. I had about 50 district teams with me, and we were really diving into. And by the way, let me start. I probably shouldn't have used the connectivity example for equity first, because that's what we all naturally think about, and that's like the hubcap on the car of equity. It's one facet, but it's one small facet in the overall. It's huge for those 16.9 million children. But when we take a look, it is a far deeper concept than just connectivity. And quite often, when many people think about equity, they jump right to the technology. And I shouldn't have done that from the get-go, but it's an example to start that we can all relate to because we've all been working through it. I was working at this, we had about 50 leadership teams, and we were diving into equity. It was about a full day summit around equity, and we were really diving in. And I was really pushing some teams on really evaluating equity-related issues and structures and systems, like, I don't know, how we do AP courses and who can get in, who's allowed to get in, and who can't. Oh, we're going to use teacher recommendation. We're going to use grades. So we're saying the 2 teachers across the hall that are recommending, 2 teachers across the hall that have the 89.5 and not the 89.4, they teach in the exact same way, and we have exact same grades, and we're that perfect that we can then say, yes, you can't, but no, you can't. Right. And so when we think about structures in the past that have traditionally been broken down, we really have to look into those areas. And the reason I started to share having those 50 teams, because I had 2 different teams that day as we were pushing that I walked to their table, these leadership teams, and they said point blank, both of them, Tom, in our district, we can't think of a single equity related issue. Like, all kids have devices, and that's what they jump to. And they literally, in their minds, couldn't think of an equity related issue in their district. And I didn't know if I should laugh or I should cry. And when I took a look, as we started to dive deeper into it, they needed to understand it goes far beyond the technology, far beyond the connectivity. We have to look at things like our hiring practices. We have to look at things like our curriculum and deep diving into that. We have to look at like our leadership teams and our student demographics. Do they match? Why or why not? We have to look at the way HR operates inside our hiring practices. And it's easy to say, well, we didn't get any applicants of such and such descent, but did you actively recruit? Because there's very differences there. I can do a passive, oh yeah, sorry, we didn't have, or I can be active if we really, really mean it. And so there's so many facets when we take a look at our learning spaces. Who's glorified on our walls? Who's not? Who's missing? Whose voices count? Whose voices have been silenced? And we really have to dive into so many different pieces to that to truly talk about equity. The opportunity side, take the highest level course at any of your high schools and walk in. In the United States, you walk in, most kids in that course look like Tom Murray, white, and from suburban America. And sometimes I'll get pushback because I'll work directly with the FCC. I work directly with the Senate, the Congress on many of these areas. And sometimes I'll get some pushback being like, Tom, you're a white dude. You shouldn't be doing any equity work. And here's the thing. My voice is one voice, and you should not just be listening to my voice. I'll tell you that, because you do need diverse voices in this topic. I'll be the first person to tell you that. But second, when you have a platform, I also believe you have an obligation. And part of it's to recognize, yes, I grew up in suburban America in a 2-parent home as a white male who's never experienced racism, that was not worried about my next meal, that didn't grow up in poverty. So the reality is there is so many things in life that I couldn't relate to that my kids were going through. And so as a leader, as a future ready leader, how do I step back, have that vulnerability, have true empathy to understand that lens is different. It's not that my lens is better, it's different than somebody else. And so when we talk about equity, we have to really evaluate our own lens, our own upbringing, the way our own culture, the way we see the world, the opportunities that somebody like me has been given that somebody else hasn't, and really dive into through an empathy lens of how do I create an environment to level the playing field for every child? Because it's easy to say like, oh yeah, we believe in all kids, but do we really? Because we could say we believe in all kids, but then we limit opportunities for many kids, right? And those things don't match. The opportunity side, we talk about the courses. We could talk about which students, are taking which courses. How do we actively recruit? We can look at it also from a gender end. We can look at it in so many different ways. But access and opportunity are really a clear way to help delineate some of these pieces. But I want to be clear, it's not just about technology. It's not just about devices. It's far, far deeper than that.
Tom, let me ask the question. What was it like sitting at the table when the eyes opened wide open and said, oh my, never thought of it like that? Because I'll tell you what, you're doing a deep dive into something where we have systems in place that have been there for a long time that they don't recognize that it pertains back to equity.
Yeah. So what I often try and do as well is to help people understand their own lenses. And Personal and Authentic, one of the things I talk about is this notion of the hidden stories within. I threw an example earlier of like Tom Murray's never experienced racism in my world. And so I'll talk to some of my best friends who are different descents who very much have, and the empathy that I now have that I recognize that maybe I didn't have throughout my entire life, it's really hit me. And so for me, when I take a look at some of those conversations, it's helping people recognize your own lens, because it's easy for people to start to get really defensive in these conversations or feel like you're saying I'm doing something wrong, and they start to jump down that closed-minded kind of fashion. And so it's really important to help people to understand how we can be vulnerable, how we can look at our own lens. And when I talk about the hidden stories within, it's recognizing the stories on each of our hearts that we all have. And sometimes they're good things. Like maybe you're going away next weekend with your spouse, and here's the thing, like nobody else knows, but you're super excited about it. But maybe you're struggling today, and here we are, and nobody else knows, right? It's those stories that are on our hearts. And so when we recognize, how do we let people recognize like we've got one lens, one way of seeing the world, and we've got things on our minds and on our hearts that other people don't know and don't understand? When we think about that, and we can start to break down our own lens and recognize your way of seeing the world is unique. It's unique to you, right? And it's not any better. It's just different than the person sitting next to you, the person that's across the hall. And so for me, that's a starting place of recognizing our own lens, our own experience, to then be able to step back and recognize, well, those students coming into your school, where are their differences? Maybe they're differences in language. Maybe it's differences in gender, whatever it might be, to then recognize how do we look at it in a way to say, in my own world, The way I see the world is going to be fundamentally different than many of the kids that I serve, many of the colleagues that teach across the hall. And how can I lead with an empathy lens in that process, especially when there's things that we're working through that we've never personally experienced? And for me, that was a really good starting point, kind of on my journey to support this work.
So implied biases. So we all have them from where we sit, and very difficult sometimes to break through that lens. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for giving that good background. So let's kick it around for equity here, and let's start off with Dr. White. Equity within your building. What does that look like?
When we start talking about that equity piece, the first thing that hit me, and I wanted to jump on testing, but that was definitely an easy one to jump on to. We had kids that, of course, took state testing last year after, really dealing with the pandemic. For some of our kids who have parents at home, have the stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home dad, or have individuals that made sure that they had access to technology and all of that stuff, you can see those kids doing better on that test. And I always look back and say, where are we on making sure that we are providing our kids with that level of equity? How are we making sure that they are able to step up? And the first thing is, of course, relationships. Are we having those relationships with our scholars, that our scholars can express themselves? Our scholars can tell us what they're missing or what they're lacking. Are we having relationships, or we are having our scholars where they can have relationships with other kids so they can have that connectivity that's going to promote that thinking when they test? For a lot of our kids, that just wasn't there. And I think we consistently with Rona are missing the big point. We're not giving the kids what they need. And I think that's across the board. So my friends that I talk with in New York or Chicago, and they feel the same way about that equity piece. Another piece within our buildings, that the equity that is being provided for our teachers. People that are not in our buildings, the people that don't do the work that we do, they are really gung-ho at times. And hey, you guys can do it. These kids can, they're really gung-ho. But when you come in the building and you have to deal with that amount of stress that teachers deal with, that amount of stress that building leaders have to deal with, you see through a different lens then. So there is an inequity that is occurring for individuals that are not doing the work that we're doing. So as building leaders, I push myself all the time. How can I make sure that my teachers are on even footing with everybody? I give them, they tell me if they need any type of resource, I'm going to find it. If they need something to get their spirits up, I'm going to find it. I'm coming out of my pocket with it. I'm trying to find Title I funds if I can with it. I think it's our job not only to make sure that we have stepping stools to equal the playing field for our teachers and our scholars. Sometimes we are doing that for our parents also. We have those places where our parents can come in our buildings and try to go online and find jobs, or they need somebody to talk to because they don't have anybody to talk to out in the real world. So we're trying to provide equity as leaders for every one of our stakeholders. And I think that's a trying job. But I know Dean and Chris, we've been on the verge of talking about testing for a long time. And I know once we get into the equity part of testing, we would have maybe a 2-hour podcast here. So
be an avalanche.
Yeah, right. So just making sure as a building leader, you provide those step stools for your teachers, your kids, your parents, everybody, so that equity is visible in your building. That's where I am.
Dr. White, I'm glad you said that. And there's one caveat that I want to add to what you said. It's the stresses that kids carry with them into school that prohibit them to be able to learn at their highest level. And those are the intangibles that you have to be ready to understand them. If you can't, kids aren't going to learn at their highest level. So thank you so much for saying that. Alejandro, equity in your building.
I agree with everybody. I think it's an area that I think we sometimes ignore. I'll be honest with you. I think sometimes we kind of we think or assume that it's there and that everybody has a clear understanding and that we're working towards that same purpose, and we don't bring it out, and we don't discuss it. I'll speak when we have a majority, like in our case, we're predominantly Hispanic, and, there's even groups within that, and people start to level each other, even amongst each other. And we, amongst ourselves, start creating those gaps. And start creating that separation amongst, you have this, I have that, you're my kind, you're not my kind. And even our kids make those groups, right? And unfortunately, I even see it within adults. And I think it's up to us to make sure that we bring this up. Right now, we keep talking about coronavirus, which, we're still in the middle of it, especially as we get into fall. We don't know what's going to happen as flu season comes around and how it's going to impact our children and their home environment and their parents that go out there and work every day. But I think for us, we need to take discuss the elephant in the room, because the reality is that, there is a large gap in our buildings. And I think it's really important that we realize that there's kids that are sitting in the dark Tom talked about it in connectivity. And I'm also talking about it socially. They sit there in the dark in so many ways, and then they get ignored. And the reality of it for me is that one child that we lose is one too many, and whether it's through graduation or their livelihood, or, sometimes we see it at a very higher impact, in terms of livelihood. But I really think that even as people, and it's very cliche when we say all is all, but is all really all? Are you willing to look at a child in a number and say, well, I had a 95% success rate. Well, what happened to the other 5%? Is it just a number? Or is that child just a number? And I'm glad Dr. Federic talked about it, because that goes way into testing too. I think, a lot of times we just look at a kid and he's like, well, you know what, we're okay because, we made our standard. We met our goal. But for me, I think, and for all of us, I think as educators, you losing one child through because of lack of equity. And sometimes I'm sorry, I speak for myself, and I take full accountability that we build that amongst ourselves because we ignored that conversation, a difficult conversation to have with our kids in the classrooms and with our community.
Love the passion. Absolutely love it. And you're spot on when you're being a champion for every kid at every level. Good stuff. Dr. Parks. Jeff.
It is Dr. Parks, but I'll take Jeff too. Yeah.
I got you.
So for me, I grew up in the same community that I work in right now. And forever, all of our students looked exactly like I did, 30 something years ago. We've had a big shift over the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years within the town. Tremendous amount of housing developments have been going up. There's a lot of new students coming in throughout the course of the school year. So kids are coming from different parts of the state, different parts of the country, different parts of the world now. And this has been a big shift for all of our staff. We went from, when I first started at my school, about 16 years ago, when I first started at Parker, having 2 ELL teachers in the district, right, for about 5,000 kids. Now every school has one. We have 1.5. They're just the level of service for students that are coming from all of these different places that need additional support is just booming. So from an equity standpoint, what that means for me and for our staff is that we need to continue to work to make sure that we are providing the same support, the same opportunity for the students who showed up last week from Pakistan, as we have been giving to the students who grew up across the street and their mom or dad works in the district, right? So from an equity standpoint, and this is a big mind shift and it's a lot of work, but it's something that we're all kind of learning and working through together to make sure that all kids that come in are not those new kids from the new neighborhood. They're Parker kids and they're part of our team now. And we got to do everything we can in order to make sure that they not only feel that, but they have the same experiences that everybody else does. It's not an easy lift, but it's something that we're just going to continue to work through as our demographic continues to change in a good direction.
One of the things I hate to see is that financing puts a block on abilities for experiences for kids. So, for example, like if you're in our building and we have one foreign language teacher for 652 kids, you want to talk about equity. Why is it that only a certain number of kids can have access to a foreign language? Well, we don't have the funding to have the extra teachers there. That's another lens through equity that we just don't ever stop and think about. So those experiences, whether it's pre-algebra and algebra, you know what? Okay, so a 93.7 is the cutoff. You can't have that because you didn't have that average. That's wrong. Every child should have the experience to be able to have at least an opportunity to be able to access that type of learning. Josh, kick it over to you.
I'd just like to mention that not being born in this country, being an immigrant to this country, obviously I look at education through a different lens. A lot of what Alejandro said is true, that even within our group, Hispanics, There's a schism between second generation and immigrants, and there is an awkward conversation that goes there. But it comes down to one thing. It comes down to belief. Because you know what? I'm here in North Dallas, and the belief that I saw in the border is different than the belief that I have here in North Dallas. Because in the border, it's us. It's Hispanics. It's people from Mexico, from Chihuahua, from the south of Mexico coming in. And we know that we have to educate all. All means all. There is no this percentage and this percentage. So people that come from that background, people that were born in, as I said before, there's a difference between United States poor and Mexico poor. Yeah. And when you bring that to the table in an education aspect, people don't want to hear that. They want to hear, why don't you know A squared plus B squared equals C squared? So that's why I go into the whole concept of belief. And it's not getting easier. As Jeff said, we're getting Pakistanis, Afghanis, El Salvador. The school that I'm at is from all over the world. I've got kids from Africa. I've got kids from Vietnam. I've got kids walking from El Salvador. For sure, we're going to be having Haitians now. We have everything coming in. And then it's about the mindset that I said earlier with the very first topic. Are we in education for the appropriate why? Because you know what? That kid that just walked from El Salvador, that's the future governor of the state of Texas. That kid from Vietnam, that's the future president of MIT. And how are we meeting their needs? We have to meet them where they're at. And it all goes back to always, kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And once they feel it, they're willing to walk on fire for you. So what are we doing in education right now in the middle of a turmoil? In the middle of all this, it doesn't matter. Because if we don't connect with the kids, we cannot make them believe that they can be the president of MIT. We can help them believe that they're going to be the governor of Texas because they are the future. We are the present. Everybody here on this call, those kids coming in, they're the future of this country. So we need to remember that and we need to prepare them. Not the things that I heard negative, punished for speaking Spanish when I came to this country. And a lot of those people might still be around. So it's what is the why?
Tom, we're going to kick it back over to you. Personal and authentic learning. And I'll tell you what, Josh, you always inspire me. I love what you're saying because you hit the actual apex of why we do what we do. And you articulate it so well. So, Tom, kicking it back over to you. Personal and authentic learning. Talk about that for a minute and we'll go from there.
So, Dean, I'd actually love to follow up, Josh. That was brilliantly said. And earlier, he was talking about having, people surrounded that are much smarter than you. And I've realized in the last number of minutes here that I'm sitting with 6 people that are a heck of a lot smarter than I am. So I'll be the first to say that here. But let me give everybody a gut check if you're watching this. I would challenge you to pick up your phone, open your text messages, and look at the last 10 text messages. Who are they to? You see, is your circle of influence diverse? Because if it's not, that's a pretty good gut check. And I'm going to give my really good friend Dwight Carter. We talk a lot about race, and Dwight's a black male. I'm a white male, if you haven't noticed. We talk a lot about race. We talk a lot about these topics. And again, equity is not just about race, but race, let's be clear, comes through loud and clear quite often when we talk about equity-related issues. And 2 questions that he said to really process on that he often asks are, and just to throw to our viewers here, number 1, when's the last time that you in your home had somebody of a different race over for dinner, over something social? When was the last time? That's just something to process. Number 2, if you have your own child, I have my daughter and my son. If they came home dating somebody of a different race, how would you feel about that? Honestly, because that'll give you a really good gut check. I just gave you 3 things that could be also a kick in the gut for some people. And so they're not just the 3 main factors, but there's 3 real quick checks that'll check our gut on how we really feel. Because to be completely honest, it's real easy to say the right thing. But where's your heart really? And so those are just a couple quick examples. So I want to just throw that in there. Let's talk about personal and authentic. I appreciate the shout. It's my last baby in that. When we talk about personal and authentic learning experiences, again, I see it through the eyes of my daughter, who loves things like technology and computer science. But walk into the average computer science in the country, there's not a lot of females in there. It's one example from a gender end, going back to equity related to computer science. I want my little girl, if that's what she wants to do in life, to be totally comfortable doing that. So How do we actively recruit our females? Going back to merge the two conversations. We talk about personal and authentic. I created a personal and authentic framework that really brought in, I interviewed so many principals, so many teachers, asking them, how do you make learning personal and authentic? I referred to it that for so long. And then I started to process, like, what does that look like for you in a kindergarten classroom or a physics classroom or a middle school English classroom? And really brought through a number of things that continue to come out. Things like social emotional learning. Obviously, again, it's been front and center in the pandemic. And let's face it, the best districts, the best schools have always prioritized people before stuff. But it hasn't happened in all the places. Leveraging things like our interests, our passions, and our strengths. How often do we look at things in a deficit mindset? We go to that data team meeting, and here's the 52 things the kid's missing. And we don't have the conversation on here's the 1,000 things they're really good at, right? And so not leading with that deficit mindset. It's leveraging things like pace and path and flexibility in that regard. And let's face it, things like COVID have put that front and center. I know we're all sick of the word like asynchronous, but it was an example of using time differently. And here's the thing, we often look, and I've heard so many people focus on when it was remote learning and there were so many negative aspects. Well, let me tell you, how many different ways have kids grown in the pandemic that they may not have if they didn't have that experience? I know my daughter grew very much on an independent end because she had to log in. She had to go in here. She had to use these tools. And there were so many benefits to that. Now, nobody would ever choose what we went through. But again, it's the mindset. Do I focus on the deficits or do I focus on the positives? And now what I'm not talking about there is some toxic positivity. What I'm not talking about is ignore the negatives or ignore the data, but recognizing that our kids are not data points and test scores. When that child's walking through the hallway, do we see data points and test scores, or do you see the world of potential that child is, that starting point, no matter where they are, and then create opportunities and to allow them to experience so they can do what they ultimately want to do so that they can live on their own terms ultimately. And let's face it, for different kids, that's going to look different. But in our role, how do we break down some of those barriers? And so the technology is one way that we can help level the playing field. It's one example. The learning spaces matter in which these things happen. But how do we truly move where experiences really lead to that deeper learning and aren't just that regurgitation? And I also want to premise all of that. But there's amazing things happening in classrooms from coast to coast. I don't share any of that, assuming middle schools or whatever kind of school you are in. I don't assume that they're not, because there are great things happening every day from coast to coast that I would deem certainly personal and authentic in nature.
You know, if you look at, thank you so much, Tom. If you look at the 10 lowest performing kids in your entire school, and I say to you, how do you assure that those kids are getting the exact same opportunities and experiences than every other child? And we went around this room. I'd love to hear how you guys viewed that, because I could tell you, and not by any other means, except those are the kids that I'm laser focused to as soon as they get off the bus in the morning, to ensure that they are balanced. If they are balanced, they have a chance to learn. Now, if I go, let's kick it over to Josh to start this. We'll do a quick 1 minute and 30 seconds with this one, Josh. What do you do for those kids that you know that just need a little more love?
You got to be on them in a loving way, both at that moment, I still do the quick, hey, what's up, knuckle, whatever you want to feel. You need to make that connection, because the reason that they are that way, the reason they have the hoodie, the reason they have the buds, the way they have the head down, it's because no one has connected with them for years in public education. They tuned us out. They're not buying what we're selling. So it's about making those. You need to insert the credit on the credit card, the person's credit card, always by making connections daily. Then they'll believe. You can't fake the funk with those kids. Not at all. As Principal Cafela says, they need to believe that you're there for them. And always doing little things to go that extra mile, promote the culture that it's not just them, but everybody, that when they go to our home, our school, it's a lineless blanket for them. They're going to be safe, and they could take those risks.
Alejandro.
I think Tovar speaks truth, and I think I love this panel because you all speak truth. We're talking, having difficult discussions, but I think with those kids, we got to meet them where they're at. We got to get to know our kids and see what their needs are, because sometimes, their basic needs are not even being met, and we expect them to come and perform in the classroom and to do well. And, it's up to us to get to know them. And Josh talked about it perfectly. It's about investing in our kids, getting to know them, so that we can support them in and out of the classroom, because, they'll forget, the algebraic equation you taught them. They'll forget a lot of their test scores, but let's be honest, they won't forget how we treated them, and they won't forget about us. Whether it was a bad experience, that'll never go away, and if we can take one bad experience and give them the opportunity, and if we're that person, that encourage them to come every day, so be it. So that little by little, you might not see the gains right now. As long as they don't have zero regression, you know what? You might see the payoff later. And I think it goes back to us investing in human capital in our kids, and just having that human element as leaders and as teachers in the classroom.
Being a champion. Dr. Parks.
I echo a lot of what, of course, what Josh and what Alejandro have said. For me, it's student choice and student voice. So giving all students the opportunity to have some say in the direction that we're moving. And for me, I'm on my spot in the morning when the buses are unloading, and you got to be just as excited to see, the ones that make it easy, the comedians, the one you've known forever and you grew up with dad and mom or whatever. You got to be just as excited to see that student as you do the one who doesn't want to make eye contact with you, but you keep trying and show them that you care enough, you'll wear them down. They always come around. And like you said, Dean, in the beginning, those kids that need just a little bit more love. And that's what we got to keep doing. Just make sure you're, 100 miles an hour with all of them all the time. And you got to listen when they're ready to talk.
Love it. Dr. White.
Two things. First, help them develop their why. Help the kids to know what they want to do, what they want to be, and help them put those things in place to get there. Some of our kids come without that drive and desire. They don't know what their future is going to look like. They don't have those positive images in their life to help them to form that future. So be that guiding point for them, help them to develop their why, and then help them to get there. And the next thing, as a leader, don't be above doing anything. My kids are always laughing because I'm that guy who's out there picking up trash. I'm the guy who's playing crossing guard duty. I'm the guy that's in the back lot doing traffic duty when the kids are being dropped off. So they know that I'm not too good to do anything, and therefore they know that I'm approachable, and my kids can have a conversation with me. They can stop me. Hey, Dr. White, can I talk to you for a minute? I have a problem with this guy or whatever. And they're not scared to say, hey, this is what's going on with me. Can you help me? Because they know that my job is to handle problems that they can't. And that's what I tell them. I'm here. I get paid a lot of money, not, in their mindsets, a lot of money to handle problems so that you don't have to. So have that relationship, have them develop their why, help them to get to their why.
You talked about developing the why. And one of the things that I do, and I know Chris subscribes to the same philosophy, is I have my students create term goals. And their goals are very simply put: academic, social, and emotional. Because I tell them in a weekly email that goes out with a video, you know what, if you don't define your target goals, you're going to go through middle school aimlessly. So simple, succinct goals that help you get to your level of success is really, really important. And it's a very easy task to do with a form. You throw it out there and you'll be amazed what your kids will come back telling you what they want to accomplish. Then it's our job to wrap a blanket around them and ensure they get there. So Chris, kick it over to you.
Yeah, three things. First, Tom, the idea of the pandemic leading to learning loss, it actually led to a lot more opportunity. I subscribe to that thought, and I've been looked at like I've got three heads sometimes when I go down, and you articulated my thinking perfectly. Thank you for validating that I'm not absolutely nuts. Second, I think, personal, authentic, really relies on that, like everybody said, the relationship piece and honoring individuals for who they are as they come through the doors. Everybody's got a backpack on, and I'm not talking the book bag. I'm talking the invisible backpack with their experiences, their demographic background, their family problems, their family successes, their family history, the struggle with bullying from the third grade playground. All of that comes into the building every single day, and it's honoring kids for who they are, and what they want to become. It's not necessarily only about success with grades. I've got a strong belief about grades, and that could be another 2-hour show sometime. But, when we sit down and we talk about recognizing kids for their successes, the kid who's been absent for 10 days over the first 30, and then all of a sudden the next 30, they've only been absent 4 times. They should be recognized for that, improving that attendance, acknowledging that they're starting to step up. They're starting to become more involved and engaged. The grades, those will come. But you know what? Maybe grades aren't this kid's talent. Maybe this kid's amazing coaching other kids with other skills. Maybe this person is the cross-country captain because he's an amazing runner, but the grade is going to prevent him from influencing others to be successful. We got to rethink, we got to honor where kids are at, what they can become, and not stick to antiquated ways of what success is. And we've got to honor those individual perspectives. And the final piece that I've got here, and it relates to what was said a little while ago, and Josh used credit card, I use currency. Identify those kids who might appear as disengaged. What is their currency? What is going to get them to give us eye contact? Maybe that was Frederick with the credit card. I'm sorry. Maybe we've got to identify what they feel is important, so that way we can adjust to them and make them feel more included, getting to this equity piece. They don't need to conform to us. We need to conform to them.
Circling back and meeting every kid where they're at. What a concept that is. Boy, schools would be outstanding if we all did that. Hey, Tom, I'm going to kick it back to you again. And before we close out tonight, because we're coming up on the 50-minute mark, we could probably talk forever, but where can people find your book, and how can people get you to come out and speak to their school or their district?
Awesome. So I'd like 30 seconds to also respond to that question, if I could, real quick. I believe one of the things I wrote in Personal and Authentic is that a child's story defines the context in which his or her learning occurs. And I think that helps summarize some of the pieces that we just heard, in that my response would be get to know the student, number one, and build trust. Get to know their story, get to understand why they see the world the way that they do. So personally, we can connect on thomascmurray.com. It links off to Facebook, to Instagram, to Twitter, all the different areas that are there. Would love to connect. I'll also give you all 100+ resources totally free, and you don't need the book. If you go to thomascmurray.com/authentic.edu, it's the book's hashtag, thomascmurray.com/authentic.edu. There's over 100 videos, articles, resources, all totally free. You don't need the book, around topics like culture, equity, and those kinds of things that we've been talking about. Use it for your faculty meetings, your in-service days, your discussion starters, all totally free. I continue to add to it on a weekly basis. I'd love for you to check them out, just to be able to support each other. We're in this work together, and I got your back. And so that's why I wanted to share those pieces. If you want to connect, reach out on the website. Would love to do so. Love supporting schools around the country.
Awesome, Tom. Yeah, thanks so much. And we will go ahead and link those resources up on our Unlock the Middle website, as well as we'll get that out on Twitter and on Facebook as well. Everybody out there in Unlock the Middle land, first I want to say thank you to Tom Murray for coming in tonight and sharing and open up a great door to conversation. Josh, Jeff, Frederick, welcome Alejandro, and thank you for joining us. Dean, as always, hey, next Sunday night, we are diving deeper into equity with Dawn Harris. You're not going to want to miss this one. We spent about 20 minutes on equity tonight. The entire show next week is on equity. Thanks, everybody out there. Have a great week ahead. You know what it is to be great, and you know how to do it. Just make it happen.
Everybody stay put.